Hi, shalom everyone. You're funny even in English, I must say. Wow, it's even more exciting than I thought. So I wonder how many of you have heard about Tommy Manville, you know, the Manhattan socialite, also known as the Asbestos King. He was married no less than 13 times to 11 different women. So I guess you could say he knew a thing or two about love and certainly about divorce. And he once said, when talking about his former wives, that my wife cried and the judge wiped her tears with my checkbook. And this was his idea about the relationship between law and the broken heart. Or as Shinichi Suzuki, the inventor of the famous violin teaching method, would put it, love is grand, divorce is 100 grand. But cynicism aside, I think you'd agree that most people consider the law and the love to be entirely unrelated and their union contradictory, so much so that love lives when law makes its appearance. But today, I want to challenge this conventional wisdom and try to show you that rather than being strangers, law and the love are in fact opposites that attract. And despite the major role that both law and the love play in our lives, we still lack a rigorous legal analysis of how different conceptions of romantic love have been enshrined in various legal doctrines. And I argue that if we were to use love as a paradigm, then it would become possible to critically re-examine the validity of certain legal constructs and to explain otherwise unclear and incoherent bodies of legal doctrine. And so from marriage and divorce law, through contract and tort law, to criminal law, the state has been keeping itself busy with trying to construct the proper model of love we all should follow, thereby creating what I call the jurisprudence of love. So, what's love got to do with it, with the law? The state has a long history of using legal tools in order to decide for us whom to love and how to love. For example, it took almost until the 70s for blacks to be allowed to love whites and for whites to love them back. Change only came when the US Supreme Court issued a celebrated decision, the so very aptly named Loving versus Virginia, declaring that love in America was colorblind. And to give you a more recent example, to this day, first cousins, sometimes even second cousins, cannot legally marry in about half of US jurisdictions, a ban which would have made the unions involving Mary and St. Joseph, Prophet Muhammad and his favorite wife, Charles Darwin, Albert Einstein, even Queen Victoria and Albert Einstein, effectively incestuous. And everywhere else in the world, the law is even more selective about love choices. In Israel, for example, a Cohen cannot marry a divorcee, and a widow who has buried two husbands is called a lethal woman, Isha Katlanit. And according to the halachically based Israeli law, she is no longer permitted to love again because she's a hazard to men. And really, this is the applicable law in current Israel. And so, until quite recently, the law also believed that the romantic love between unmarried men and women must remain strictly platonic. And to this day in Trumpland, 13 US jurisdictions still have fornication laws on the book that make premarital sex a criminal offense. And the law even went further than that and attempted to control what happened in the marital bedroom until the American Supreme Court was kind enough to tell the states that it had no business dictating to married people how to conduct their love lives. And finally, homosexual love is still largely perceived as tainted love. In Israel, for example, homosexual sex became legal only in 1988, and homosexual love is still a legal impossibility here. And in the US, it took until last year for the American Supreme Court to have the judicial courage to concede that same-sex relationships were not an inferior kind of love unworthy of marital recognition. So, in other words, Today, love in America is both color as well as sex blind. But the law also seeks to instill a particular set of values into what it perceives to be a proper model of love. For example, in common law jurisdictions like the US, like England, the law used to subscribe to traditional notions of marriage, to the perception that this legal union joined two halves into a whole person, that two become one. The only problem is that the one in question was the husband. Or if you allow me to paraphrase a famous Israeli song, first I'll say it in Hebrew and in English, בלעדיו היא חצי בן אדם, ואיתו היא בעצם כלום. She's half a person with him and then nobody. She's half a person without him and then nobody with him. Because once married, the woman's legal personhood was embedded and submerged into her husband's, and she was considered civilly dead. She was not able to engage in legal actions. She was not able to enter into contracts. She was not able to hold property. Even her body was not her own. Marital rape was a legal contradiction in terms because the law believed that for love's sake, a woman must provide sexual favors to her husband on demand and give him unrestricted access to her body by virtue of being of one flesh. Or, as one California legislator put it, and I quote, if you cannot rape your wife, who can you rape? And wait, there's more. The law also concocted a recipe for healthy marital relationships. A gender division of labor, with wife playing the role of a homemaker, and husband playing the role of a breadwinner. And this legal love potion also prescribed total wifely obedience. And husband was allowed to use mild violence in order to discipline his wife, provided that the whip he used for this purpose was not thicker than his thumb. And in case you were wondering, this is the origin of the common expression we all use, a rule of thumb. It referred to the legal test that was applied in common law courts in order to decide whether wife beating was legal or, should I say lawful or criminal. And think about this. To this day, we use this common expression in our everyday language without even suspecting its outrageous patriarchal underpinnings. By the way, you see here a finger, because in Israel, in Hebrew, we say klal etzba. Now, a rule of thumb is klal etzba. Etzba is a finger. But this is all an 18th century, 19th century talk. Let's move to the second half of the 19th century, because there we encounter the next evolutionary step in the legal conception of love. And then with this, the law finally realized that it was only harming love by being this meddlesome. And so it adopted the non-interference in the family doctrine. And the all-male courts started romanticizing the domestic sphere by employing the rhetoric of privacy and marital harmony in order to justify the refusal to intervene in family affairs. And so the law tended to step aside even when husbands loved their wives to death. And it was a slow awakening, but with the help of legal feminists in the better half of the 20th century, the state eventually understood that its hands-off approach was only helping the strong to rule the weak and was promoting tyranny, not harmony. And so now the law subscribes to modern notions of marriage, to the perceptions that both husband and wife are autonomous and individual persons and not two halves making up one whole, and to the perception that true romantic love can only exist between equals. And so the state no longer prescribes a gender division of labor, at least not as it used to. Marital rape is no longer mission impossible, and husbands cannot beat their wives, not even in the name of love. Divorce law may also be read from a love paradigm perspective, but you'll have to forgive me for divorce from my talk today, because I want to have time for two quick thoughts experiments. One meant for the ladies and one for the gentlemen. And ladies first. So ladies, Say you love your boyfriend so much that you agree to accept in hand his marriage, only to find that his dowry includes something far less lovable, a pesky mother-in-law. And this mother-in-law sabotages your relationship and slanders you to such an extent that there comes the day when your loving husband believes her and decides to show you the door. Should the law consider your love as a protected legal interest that will hold the meddling mother-in-law liable in tort? Yes, in fact, all US jurisdictions but one, Louisiana, formally recognized your love to be so invaluable as to warrant legal protection through the law of torts. And so the states recognized a series of torts collectively known as heart-bomb torts. And 6 US jurisdictions to this day recognize the tort of alienation of affection that was designed to protect married couples from homewreckers. And so in one court decision, a daughter-in-law was awarded no less than $700,000 in damages from her mother-in-law, who, despite the fact that she was the matchmaker who convinced her son to marry the wife in the first place, was also the one who convinced him to show her the door and call it quits after the two got married. And gentlemen, now it's your turn to shine. Say your marriage isn't heavenly, but not hell on earth either, and you are faithful to your wife. One day, you decide to surprise her at her workplace, but lo and behold, she surprises you instead. You catch her rolling in the hay with one of her colleagues. Now, what would you do? Suppose you want to kill either or both of them, you should know that the law understands you. In fact, it understands you so well that to this day you will probably charge with manslaughter and not murder with a great likelihood of reduced sentencing. And this is also the case in Israel. I think this is also the origin of a famous joke that goes something like this. A fortune teller tells a woman gravely, I see unfortunately that your husband is going to pass away this year. And so the wife replies, I know that much. The only question is whether or not I'll be acquitted. But suppose you don't want to finish the lover off, only to sue his pants off. Then you should know that 20% of US jurisdictions allow you to sue the person who stole your partner's love from you. And I like to say this way, that your love may not be priceless, but it's worth money and a lot of it. For example, in a 1997 very famous American court case that also got a Hollywood adaptation, perhaps you know it, it's called The Price of a Broken Heart. A true story that became into a movie. So a betrayed wife sued her husband's secretary, alleging that the secretary seduced her husband into leaving the wife after 18 years of marriage. And now hold on tight. The ex-wife was awarded $1 million in damages from her husband's secretary, who now turned to be his second wife. And if you think this is a lot, let me tell you about a more recent case, a 2010 case, where a woman was awarded no less than $9 million in damages from the woman who stole her husband's love. But I personally think that the law must remove itself from the business of love. Although this would unfortunately rob a whole lot of stand-up comedians and screenwriters of a rich vein of materials from Sheldon Cooper's 31-page relationship agreement. I don't know if you are familiar with the episode, but it's funny. To the countless multitudes of jokes and witticisms about gold diggers and avaricious divorce lawyers. But as Albert Einstein once said in one of my most favorite quotes, two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity. And I'm not sure about the universe. And I think this is very much true about the many legal attempts to regulate and tame love. Obviously, the issue is much wider and far more complex than this. But if even this short introduction made you think a little differently about your own relationships and the part that the law plays in them, I would call it a success. And ladies, don't forget, when you go home tonight, the whip that you use should not be thicker than your thumb. תודה רבה ולחיי אהבה, for love.